By dawn, the Whitmore house stood silent. The curtains swayed though no wind passed, and in the nursery upstairs, a cradle rocked on its own, slowly, steadily, as if soothing something that could no longer be soothed. Before we continue, take a breath. The past is closer than you think. Subscribe to remember what others forgot. In the year 1874, the town of Merrow Creek lay nestled among the mist-veiled hills of Virginia. It was a place where winters lingered longer than they should, and summers never quite shed the chill that clung to the bones. People spoke softly there, as though sound itself might wake something they did not wish to see. The Whitmores lived at the edge of town, their house standing tall and proud among barren oaks and frost-bitten soil. It had been built by Elias Whitmore, a man of steel and salt, who made his fortune through the railroads. His wife, Lillian, was known for her gentleness, though her eyes carried a sadness that no one dared name. Together they had 3 children: Clara, the eldest at 15, whose pale beauty drew murmurs in church pews; Nathaniel, a solemn boy of 11 with a fascination for clocks and dead birds; and little Samuel, the youngest, 5 years old and nearly silent since birth. Samuel was not an ordinary child. He seldom cried, never smiled, and rarely spoke. His nursemaid swore that when she entered his room at night, he would already be awake, staring at the wall as if listening to someone whisper just behind it. Lillian believed he could see things others could not. Elias dismissed it as foolishness, though he too had begun locking the nursery door after midnight. It was said that the Whitmore house itself changed after Samuel was born. Servants complained of doors that refused to stay shut, of music boxes that played on their own, of a faint smell of smoke that drifted through the halls though no fire burned. Once, a maid claimed to have seen wet footprints trailing down from the attic. She left the next morning without collecting her wages. The townsfolk avoided the property altogether. They said the house had grown tired of keeping secrets. But the Whitmores stayed. Elias busied himself with business trips, leaving for weeks at a time. Lillian grew frail, often found wandering the garden long after dark, whispering to the air as though pleading with someone unseen. Clara became the house's quiet caretaker, trying to keep the peace between her distant father and fading mother. And Nathaniel, bright, observant Nathaniel, spent hours watching his little brother, trying to understand what lay behind those wide, glassy eyes. One night in October, a storm crept through Merrow Creek. The rain was relentless, the kind that blurred the world into gray ribbons. The Whitmore family gathered in the parlor, the fire casting restless shadows across the walls. Lillian sat by the hearth, humming an old lullaby under her breath. Samuel sat on the rug before her, his small hands tracing circles in the ash. "Samuel," Clara said softly, "what are you doing?" He looked up, his face expressionless. "Drawing the man." Lillian's hum faltered. The wind groaned through the chimney. Elias lowered his newspaper. "What man, son?" Elias asked. Samuel pointed toward the corner of the room where the wallpaper had begun to peel. "The one who says he used to live here." A hush fell. Even the fire seemed to shrink from the words. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "No one lived here before us." "Yes," Samuel said. "He said he did. He said he was waiting." Lillian rose slowly, her chair creaking in protest. "Samuel, that's enough. It's time for bed." Her voice trembled, her knuckles white around the hem of her sleeve. Samuel didn't move. He just looked toward the corner again, his gaze unblinking. The others followed his stare, half expecting to see something, or someone, staring back. The lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a breathless instant. And in that moment, Clara thought she saw a figure reflected in the glass of the window, a pale outline of a man standing just behind Samuel, his hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. Then the light was gone. The fire hissed. Lillian screamed. When Elias rushed to light another candle, the corner was empty. Only Samuel remained, calm, still tracing his circles in the soot. That night, the storm passed, but the house did not rest. Doors groaned in the dark. The sound of a cradle rocking echoed faintly through the upstairs halls, though Samuel's bed was bare. Nathaniel found his mother sitting at the edge of her bed near dawn, her face ghostly in the pale light. "Mother," he whispered, "who was that man?" She looked at him for a long, shivering moment, her lips trembling as if struggling with a truth too heavy to speak. Then she leaned forward and whispered a name Nathaniel had never heard before but would remember for the rest of his life. And from that moment on, he began to notice how the walls seemed to breathe when Samuel was near. The Whitmore family carried on with their routines, but something had changed. At breakfast, Samuel would hum tunes that no one recognized. At night, Lillian placed salt across the windowsills. Elias began sleeping in his study with the door locked. The air grew thick with dread. One afternoon, Clara found her mother in the attic, standing before an old trunk. Inside were papers, birth records, deeds, a photograph of the house long before they owned it. But what caught Clara's eye was a folded letter, stained and brittle with age. It bore the name, Elias Whitmore, written in a hand that was not his own. Her mother snatched it away before she could read it. "This house remembers," she whispered, "and it does not forgive." That night, Clara woke to the sound of someone crying. She followed the voice to the nursery. The door creaked open on its own. Samuel sat in the dark, facing the window. The moonlight caught his hair, his small shoulders trembling. "Samuel," she whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes hollow yet glinting with something far older than he was. "Do you hear them too?" he asked. "Who?" "The family that used to live here." The wind sighed through the room, carrying with it a faint, mournful hum, like the lullaby their mother used to sing. But it wasn't her voice. And for the first time, Clara understood that whatever had come to their house was not leaving. Not yet. The next morning she found small handprints pressed into the frost outside her window. Too small to be Samuel's. Too old to belong to the living. The Whitmore family had begun to unravel, and the child at the center of it all was still smiling softly, as if he already knew how it would end. The following weeks bled into one another like candle wax, each day soft and indistinguishable until the nights came to reclaim what sunlight had borrowed. In the Whitmore house the air had changed. It carried a heaviness like something watching, listening, remembering. The servants whispered that the boy was cursed. They claimed that wherever he walked, the walls seemed to creak in greeting. One maid insisted that she saw footprints leading from the nursery to the cellar, small and bare, yet burned black into the floorboards as though seared by heat instead of pressed by flesh. By December the house had emptied of nearly everyone but the family. Elias dismissed the servants one by one, calling them superstitious fools. Yet even he, the proud patriarch, had begun to glance over his shoulder when the corridors fell silent. Lillian rarely left her room now. Some nights, Clara would find her sitting in front of the mirror, whispering prayers not found in any scripture, her fingers tracing patterns across her reflection as if drawing symbols only she could see. Nathaniel wrote in his journal, a record of the unexplainable. Each night he listed what he heard: footsteps, whispers, humming, the scrape of something heavy being dragged down the hall though everyone was asleep. He wrote about Samuel too, how his younger brother seemed untouched by fear. Once, Nathaniel had caught him standing in the nursery with his hand pressed to the wall. "What are you doing?" he asked. Samuel turned, his voice soft but certain. "He's behind it." "Who?" "The man. He says he wants his family back." Nathaniel felt the chill settle deep in his stomach. "What family?" Samuel tilted his head as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. "The ones who never left." That night, Nathaniel began sleeping with a candle beside his bed. Outside, the town of Marrow Creek remained wary of the Whitmores. Rumors spread like frost along the cobblestone streets, of a boy who could speak to the dead, of a mother losing her mind, of a house where light itself grew dim. The local pastor paid a visit once, but he left before sunset and was never seen near their gate again. Clara tried to keep the household intact, cooking, cleaning, tending to her brothers. But every sound unsettled her now: the ticking of Nathaniel's clocks, the murmur of wind against the windows, the faint lullaby that sometimes drifted through the nursery even when no one was there. One evening, as she prepared Samuel for bed, he said something that froze her in place. "Clara," he whispered, "when I die will you keep my room warm?" Her brush stilled against his hair. "Why would you say such a thing?" "Because the others are cold." "Others?" He nodded toward the empty cradle. "The children that sleep under the floor." Her heart pounded so violently she thought he might hear it. She forced a smile and kissed his forehead, though her hands trembled. That night she could not sleep, for every creak of the house sounded like a breath, every shadow like a hand reaching out from beneath the floorboards. Days later, Elias returned from a business trip, bringing with him a new preacher from Richmond, a man of severe eyes and louder faith. He came armed with crosses, scripture, and a voice that rattled the rafters. He began his prayers in the parlor. Samuel sat quietly in his chair, staring into the fire while the preacher shouted invocations meant to drive out evil. The flames flickered, then dimmed. The preacher's words faltered. A sudden silence fell, sharp and complete. Then from somewhere deep within the walls came a sound, not a knock but something like breathing. Slow, deliberate, impossibly human. The preacher backed away, his crucifix trembling in his grasp. "There is something in this house," he whispered. "Something that does not fear God." Elias's jaw tightened. "Finish it." But the preacher did not. He left before nightfall, his carriage speeding down the fog-covered road, never to return. After that, Lillian stopped speaking altogether. She began keeping vigil outside Samuel's door, sitting on the hallway floor with her rosary wound tight between her fingers. Her lips moved in constant prayer, but no sound came out. The following week, Nathaniel found her weeping in the nursery. The cradle was swaying again though untouched. When he tried to still it, it resisted, moving as though someone else held the other end. "Mother," he said, his voice breaking, "what's happening to us?" She looked up, her eyes hollow and rimmed in red. "The house remembers," she whispered. "Your father thought he could bury its history, but the dead do not stay buried." Nathaniel wanted to ask more, but Samuel appeared in the doorway, pale as paper. His gaze was not his own, it was distant, watching something just behind the veil of sight. "They're angry," he said. He said, "It's almost time." Lillian gasped, clutching her chest. Nathaniel grabbed Samuel by the shoulders. "Who said that?" "The man," Samuel replied softly. "He said he's coming back when the snow falls." And when the first snow of winter came, it did not fall gently. It howled against the windows, white and blinding, as though the sky itself wished to hide what was about to unfold. That night, Elias awoke to the sound of crying. He thought it was Lillian, until he realized it was coming from the walls. He followed the sound to the cellar, lantern in hand, the flame trembling with every step. The air grew colder as he descended, the smell of damp earth filling his lungs. When he reached the bottom, he noticed something strange. The floorboards had been disturbed. He knelt and brushed away the dust. Beneath it lay something pale. Something small. A bone. Then another. And another. Tiny, fragile bones arranged neatly beneath the planks, like a nursery buried beneath the house. He staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. And as the lantern flickered, he saw movement in the corner of the room. A shadow. Not his own. "Who's there?" he shouted. Silence. But when he turned, he saw Samuel standing at the top of the cellar stairs, barefoot, staring down at him with eyes too old for his years. "Did you find them?" the boy asked quietly. Elias's breath caught. "What did you say?" Samuel stepped down one stair. Then another. "He told me you would." "Who told you that?" "The man who built this house." Elias felt the lantern slip from his hand. The flame died. Darkness swallowed everything. When Clara found her father the next morning, he was sitting on the cellar floor, staring blankly at the wall, his hands trembling, his mind seemingly gone. He did not speak again. And from that night on, the Whitmore house began to breathe louder. The windows shuddered. The walls groaned. The whispers turned into voices that carried through every hall. And Samuel, the child who never cried, began to hum that same haunting lullaby. By the time the year turned, the Whitmore estate was a place people crossed the road to avoid. The townsfolk whispered that a curse had rooted itself in the soil, that the house was no longer a home but a mouth swallowing the living whole. The family's windows no longer glowed with light at dusk. Only a single candle sometimes flickered behind the nursery curtains, as if a hand too small to hold flame still tried. Inside, Lillian had withered into something ghost-like. She barely spoke, barely moved, wandering the halls in her nightdress, tracing her fingertips against the wallpaper as though reading it like scripture. The rosary beads she once held had broken, scattered across the stairs. She didn't seem to notice. Nathaniel had taken charge of the household, though his eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. He kept the doors bolted and the curtains drawn, but the noises persisted, the dragging sounds, the whispers, the laughter that came from nowhere. Once, he caught Samuel sitting alone in the parlor, humming to the empty air. "What are you humming, Sam?" Samuel smiled faintly. "He taught me. The song his daughter used to sing." Nathaniel froze. "Whose daughter?" "The man from the cellar." Nathaniel's hands shook. "There's no one in the cellar." Samuel tilted his head, almost pitying him. "There is. You just don't listen long enough." That night, Nathaniel returned to the cellar with a lantern and a shovel. His breath fogged before him, though the air was still. He pried up the floorboards where his father had found the bones. Beneath them the earth gave easily, soft and black. He dug until he struck wood. A small coffin. Then another. 3 in total. Tiny boxes, each marked with a carved initial, M, A and C. He did not know what they meant. He didn't want to. But as he leaned closer, something else caught his eye. Beneath the dirt, a brass plaque gleamed faintly. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. The engraving read, "To the Master's Children, from Caleb Whitmore, 1823. Nathaniel recoiled. Caleb Whitmore was their ancestor, the man who had built the estate. His great-grandfather, the patriarch whose portrait hung in the foyer. But why would he bury children beneath his own house? The realization came like a cold hand against the spine. Those initials, M.A.C., were not his ancestors' children. They were the names of enslaved infants. His great-grandfather had buried them here. He felt his stomach twist. Every whisper, every creak, every cold breath of air, it all belonged to what was left of them. He stumbled backward, knocking over the lantern. It fell into the dirt, extinguishing itself, but in that instant before the flame died, he saw something impossible. Small figures in the shadows crouched low to the ground, their eyes faintly reflecting the dying light. Watching him. He ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, his breath ragged. When he reached the parlor, Samuel was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. "You found them," Samuel said softly. "He told me you would." Nathaniel grabbed him by the shoulders. "Who is he, Samuel? Who keeps speaking to you?" Samuel looked up at him, and for the first time, Nathaniel saw the boy's eyes not as his brother's, but as something older, something that had seen too much. "He's our grandfather," Samuel whispered. "He said you were meant to finish what he couldn't." Nathaniel's voice broke. "And what's that?" "To give them peace." Before Nathaniel could answer, the fire roared suddenly, flaring high. A shadow appeared in it, tall, stern, unmistakably human. The face was faint, but the resemblance to the portrait in the foyer was undeniable. Caleb Whitmore's eyes burned from within the flames. "Blood must answer blood," the voice said. Nathaniel stumbled backward. Lillian appeared in the doorway, screaming, clutching her chest. "Stop it," she cried. "You've done enough." The firelight pulsed, spilling across the walls, crawling like liquid flame. The room grew suffocatingly hot. Nathaniel shielded Samuel, but the boy only smiled faintly, his expression serene. "It's not his fault," Samuel whispered. "He just wants them home." The sound came again, the low hum, the lullaby, and this time Nathaniel realized it wasn't Samuel humming. It came from the walls themselves. The wallpaper began to blister and peel. Shapes pressed outward from underneath like faces pushing through fabric. Children's faces. Lillian screamed again, falling to her knees, her rosary beads spilling from her hands. "Caleb, please. They're not yours." A wind surged through the house, extinguishing every candle except the one in Samuel's hand. His hair whipped around his face as if he stood in a storm. "They want a family," he said softly. "You kept them buried. He just wants to make it right." Nathaniel lunged forward. "Samuel, drop it." But the flame did not go out. It grew brighter, taller, filling the room with impossible light. For a moment, Nathaniel thought he saw them, the three small figures from the cellar, standing beside Samuel, holding his hands. Then everything went white. When Nathaniel awoke, the fire was gone. The house was silent. The walls were charred black. Lillian lay still beside the hearth, her hand outstretched toward nothing. Elias's portrait had burned away entirely, leaving only a black outline where his face had been. And Samuel was nowhere to be found. Nathaniel staggered through the ashes, calling his brother's name. His voice echoed through the halls, but no answer came. Only the sound of distant humming, fading slowly into the quiet. He found the front door open. Snow drifted inside, melting against the floor. Outside, a trail of small footprints led away from the house, vanishing into the woods. He followed them until they stopped beside the frozen creek. There, pressed into the snow, was a single child's handprint, perfect, still warm as though left moments ago. And beside it, carved into the ice with a fingernail, were three letters, M.C. Nathaniel stared until the light faded from the sky, until the cold began to take him. Behind him, the Whitmore house stood silent again. But inside, if one listened long enough, they could still hear it, the lullaby, faint and patient, waiting to be finished. They did not find Nathaniel's body until spring. The frost had receded, and the creek behind Whitmore Manor had begun to flow again, thick with thawed earth. A search party, sent by the parish, came upon him lying on the bank as though asleep, his hand still reaching toward the forest beyond. The coroner wrote in his report that his eyes had been open, frozen wide with something resembling wonder. The house itself stood unclaimed. No heirs came forward. No relatives spoke the name Whitmore again. The estate was left to rot, the shutters collapsing inward, ivy swallowing the chimneys. Some said the soil had turned sour, that nothing grew near the foundations, not even moss. But the people of the town still spoke of the brothers. Of Samuel, the boy who sang to empty rooms. Of Nathaniel, the brother who went after him. Of Lillian, whose cries were heard one final time before the fire silenced her for good. The local minister, Father Harrow, kept a journal. In an entry dated April 3, 1864, he wrote, "I was called to the Whitmore property this morning. The manor appears uninhabitable, blackened walls, hollow beams. Yet as I stood upon the threshold I heard it, the faintest hum, that of a child's tune, coming from the ruins below. When I approached the cellar the sound ceased. There were no signs of trespassers. No footprints but mine. He sealed the house himself. He had the doors barred, the cellar filled with stone, and the surrounding woods marked as cursed ground. Still the story spread. Children dared each other to walk the old path by moonlight. Some swore that if one stood at the edge of the creek at dusk and whispered the name Samuel, they would hear an answering hum, soft and sweet, as though from behind the veil of water." In 1872, a surveyor named Phelps was sent to assess the land for auction. He reported finding something strange near the creek, a sapling growing where the frost had once frozen thick. Its bark was pale, nearly white, and carved into its base, in letters too clean to be natural, were the same initials found in the cellar, and C. He did not bid on the property. Over the decades, the story became a local legend. Preachers used it as a warning against pride and cruelty. Scholars tried to explain it away: mercury poisoning, mass hysteria, superstition. But none could account for the detail that persisted through every retelling: the song, the lullaby. In 1911, an archivist restoring Father Harrow's journal claimed to have heard it herself, faintly, from the sealed cellar of the church where the book had been kept for nearly 50 years. She left the building that night and never returned to her post. By the century's end, Whitmore Manor no longer appeared on any map. The road leading to it had been reclaimed by the earth, trees rising where the gate once stood. Only one photograph remains, a sepia image found in a historian's collection, marked simply Whitmore 1862. It shows a boy standing on the manor steps, barefoot, gazing at the camera. The others in the photograph, a man and a woman behind him, are blurred as though moving. The boy's eyes, however, are sharp and unblinking. Experts insist it is a trick of exposure, a quirk of early photography. Yet those who look too long swear they can see it. 3 smaller figures standing just behind him, faint as smoke, holding his hands. The archives call it coincidence. The locals call it proof. As for the lullaby, it still finds its way into strange places. Recorded faintly in radio interference. Whistled by travelers who swear they never learned the tune. Hummed by children in sleep. And sometimes, on cold nights, when the wind shifts through the pines near the old Whitmore land, you might hear it again. Soft, patient, unfinished, waiting for the final verse. If this story lingered in your thoughts, let it live a little longer. Like and subscribe for more forgotten voices.